Yes, I'm happy to introduce Enzo Weber. Professor Dr. Enzo Weber is the head of the research area Forecasts and Macroeconomic Analysis at the German Institute for Employment and Research. He holds a chair of empirical economics at the University of Regensburg. Professor Weber, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Dear colleagues, it's clear that we are facing difficult times, and I think we all had hoped to come together under different circumstances with big challenges ahead. But nonetheless, I can say that today it's a great pleasure to be here with you, especially because I think public employment services and their stakeholders are exactly the institutions which are key actors in mastering these challenges which are ahead, and therefore I also deem that conference today especially important. I mean, in general, we are hoping that we have largely overcome the pandemic. You never know, but at least we see some light at the end of the tunnel. And therefore, of course, the question comes up how we should organize our labor markets in the future. And that is very much about what I would like to talk about in the next minutes. So if we look at the first slide, I would like to give you an overview of where we stand at the moment with our labor markets. Maybe you can try to have the full screen view, then we would have it even better, I think. So what you see here, and what you will definitely already know, is the European Labor Market Barometer, which gives you an overview of the likely development of employment and unemployment in many European states in the next months. And despite the dramatic events of the last weeks, we see that it's quite good in the green area. So the barometer is based on a survey among the regional units of many European PES. Actually, 17 PES at the moment are participating, and some more PES already have declined their interest to join the project. So that's really a great common European project of the network, I think. So it's quite remarkable, and what we see is that PES don't expect a slump in the labor market despite the war, but they expect that the recovery from the COVID times will remain rather robust. And even the colleagues in Eastern Europe in March became a bit more optimistic, and I think they also deserve special recognition for the challenges which they are really facing the most, all of us. So we can hope for quite robust recovery, but there is, of course, a drawback, and that is what it is all about today. And this is what you see on the next slide. The drawback of recovery is labor shortages. So what you see here is our ERB labor shortage index. So it's also based on the answers of the regional PES units to a survey, and there we asked the question: in how far filling vacancies is hindered by limited availability of workers, and from that we create a monthly index. There you can see, okay, it plummeted, of course, in the first lockdown, in the crisis, but then since mid-21 it's strongly increased, and now we are even higher than the pre-crisis level. So this means labor shortages are clearly back, and this is not only true for Germany, where the index is created here, but this is obviously a common trend. And we have another common trend throughout Europe, and that is displayed on the next slide. That is demographic change. So here you can see our projections for the German labor force, but we know that the demographic structure is quite similar in many European countries, and that the shrinkage, the demographic decline we are facing, especially in the 2020s, is quite similar. So what you can see here, the upper line is the development of the labor force in case of very high immigration. In all other cases, we will have strong decline in Germany. It will be several millions over the 2020s due to the demographic aging. So there is a need to adjust for that. And since it's such a quick process here going on, it will be a difficult adjustment. Since such a decline we have not witnessed for decades, and therefore it will be a difficult process which has to be halted somehow, and where we have to discuss how we can alleviate the effects of demographic change. At least it is clear that labor shortages won't go away, but that during that adjustment process, we will have further labor shortages, not only skill shortages, but also in general labor shortages throughout our labor markets. So it was already said that besides such a long run trend, right after Corona, we had different discussions. We had the discussions about the big quit, the great resignation, what happens if masses of employees are leaving their jobs due to a reorientation in the labor market. But I quite share Johannes' opinion on that, because what we see from our statistics is not that clear. You can see it on the next slide, where I displayed the number of terminated jobs per month here in Germany, but obviously it's not a trend which is only particular for Germany or specific to Germany. So what we can see here is that the number of terminated jobs, despite that January spike, which is purely seasonal, but the number of terminated jobs within the crisis and after the crisis is lower than before. It is lower than before. It is due to, of course, short-time work regulations and so on, where I think public employment services were quite successful in the crisis in many countries. But it is also due to a low quit rate. So the quit rate of employees is not higher, but it is lower than before. But there's also another side of the coin, a drawback, and this means that the hiring rate is also quite weak. So what we saw is rather low dynamics in the crisis and still after the crisis, which also led to a higher long-term unemployment. Because we are now for 2 years in the crisis. Now we have the difficult situation with the war. So it's quite a long period. So long-term unemployment definitely became an issue, and PES should be heading at preventing hysteresis effects. But there's one thing that definitely has happened, as you can see on the next slide, that is a certain reallocation in the labor market. So what you can see here, you don't have to go through that in detail, but is a transition matrix. So in the first column, you can see the occupations people have been working in initially, then they became unemployed in the crisis, and then they took a new job, which you can see in the first row. And what we did is we calculated the return rates and then took the return rates in the crisis minus the pre-crisis level. So the red cells, the negative values, this is where the return rate after unemployment to the same occupation declined in the crisis. And that is this is something that you can see especially in hospitality and tourism, in commerce and trade. So it's the typical crisis sectors, and these are the sectors which really face the challenge now to build up employment again, which they lost in the crisis. So definitely we have now additional shortages as compared to the pre-crisis level, where we saw it in technical occupations, in IT, in health, and so on, but now also further sectors joined those who are facing shortages. We have two deep trends of transformation at the moment, which are similar also throughout Europe. The first one you can see in the next slide. The first one is digitalization, where, of course, well, before the crisis, we had fears of mass substitution of jobs, that we would run out of employment because all jobs would be substituted by intelligent digital technology. So there is definitely substitution. Yeah, it's not sensible to deny that it is happening. But there's also, again, another side of the coin. It's new products, it's new services created, it's additional tasks, different tasks emerging, it's further additional productivity which generates income. So all that has to be analyzed simultaneously in order to get an appropriate picture. And this is what we did. We fed all these different things connected to digitalization into a comprehensive economic and labor market simulation model, and then simulated the outcome for the labor market. And this is what you can see here. The positive bars in thousands are additional jobs. The negative bars are jobs vanishing from via digitalization processes. And there you can see, of course, we do have jobs destroyed. That's a fact. But we also have additional jobs, and in general, it's in balance. So we won't run out of jobs. This is the message, but it will be different jobs. We have strong changes. And in which direction this goes, you can see on the next slide, where I displayed the changes regarding the requirement level. So can you switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. And there you can see the changes which come from digitalization. Okay, they are in general positive on the higher requirement levels, on the complex activities, and they are more negative on the middle skill. So this is where you have production jobs, operating machines, material processing, maintenance, and so on, but also office and commercial services. In general, those jobs which contain high shares of routine tasks. This is which can be automized best, and this is where we will see further changes in the labor market. The second trend is, on the next slide, the ecological transformation. So this is something which will also deeply change our economies and labor markets. And also here we had the fears of job losses in automobile sector, in traffic sector, in mining, and so on and so on. But again, here we did such a simulation study. So in this case, we simulated the climate policy measures which come from the current German coalition agreement, but which again is not really specific to Germany, but is things like changing gas heatings, organic farming, renewable energy, hydrogen, electric cars, and so on. So the general trend. And what we find here is, again, of course, we have jobs destroyed, but the positive bars are far bigger than the negative ones. So we need additional employment, additional employees for bringing these measures into practice. And when we look at the jobs we need here, then we find that it's occupations in the construction sector, it's in crafts, it's energy, technology, and so on, especially professionals. So this means that policies securing skilled workers are also climate policy. It's an essential It's essential for climate policy being put into practice to secure those workforce, because otherwise we will have shortages which prevent the success of climate policy. And unfortunately, of course, in these times we have to say that these needs of climate policy have become larger after the Russian attack on Ukraine. So this means that policy securing skilled workers is unfortunately in these days also geopolitics and not only climate policy. Let's conclude on the final slide. What do we learn from these empirical research results? We learn that the economic transformation does not reduce labor demand. That's the first one. We have the intelligent digitalization, we have ecological transformation, and so on. The second one, we will have strong changes of jobs and skill requirements, and we will have no alleviation of labor shortages. But instead, we will have the risk of skill shortages, which come through these changes going on in the labor market. What we see is that the shortages are increasing after COVID, also in new sectors facing shortages. And what we see is that we have a demographic change which gains in its speed in the 2020s and which will decrease labor supply. So this means that securing skilled workers is also quite important for the recovery. It's also a policy for the recovery, because we have to ease these critical bottlenecks the economy is facing at the moment regarding materials, regarding energy, but also and importantly regarding labor supply. What can we do? I think focusing labor market policy on qualification is absolutely key. So what we need is, I think in the past, is individual counseling services, professional counseling services. It is the matching, it is incentives for qualification. And we also have to think in these times how we can use periods of short-time work better for training. I think one important point is also that we should not stop learning after the initial education, but we need frameworks which integrate the initial education with further training in a common also skill framework which continuously develops over the working life. We have to develop the role of vocational training. We know that it's quite effective in combining theory and practice and smoothing the way of young people into the labor market. But we also see that in the middle skills sector, we have strong changes ahead. So therefore, amending the skill set by IT skills, by general competencies is quite important also in view of the additional needs we will have through the ecological transformation. We will have to reduce long-term unemployment after the crisis, and we will have to do so quite quickly, because once hysteresis becomes reality, it will be extremely difficult to reduce long-term unemployment again. So in this regard, we will really have to be quick. Besides all that, we see working conditions strongly change in the labor market. So it's on remote work, which completely changes many jobs. It's on the working conditions in the health sector, in elderly care and others, where also women have to be activated. I think there, especially the social partners can play a really productive role. If social partners now come up with a common concept of structuring working conditions regarding remote work and others after the pandemic, I think that would be of crucial and great help for developing the labor markets. And finally, we know that Europe as a whole in the labor markets will be shrinking. So we cannot do without migration, and we cannot do without very good integration, because we have to really also, we don't have only to attract migrants, but also have to make the most out of their potential in our labor markets. And this is, of course, something that also concerns the many Ukrainians which come to our countries now. We don't know how that will develop in the whole conflict, but we know from the past that whenever people came who deserved at first temporary protection status, many of them stayed for a long time also after the war in their home countries had ended. So therefore, we have to enable Ukrainians to make use of their skills in the EU and also to develop their skills in our labor markets. I think this is really our crucial task, and I'm sure this is also our competence. So let's go for that. Thank you very much. I'm really looking very much forward to the conference.